Hello Internet, my name is Alyssa McNulty and I'm going to be presenting the short story This Is What It Means to Save Phoenix, Arizona by Sherman Alexie to you today. So to start off, Sherman Alexie is a Native American and he's really proud of his culture, and in a lot of his writings he uses his culture for, like, this story, This Is What It Means to Save Phoenix, Arizona. It's based around the Native American culture. The toughest Indian in the world obviously has to do with Native American culture. He wrote that in 2002. And The Lone Ranger also has to do with his culture. He wrote that in 1993. And then he also wrote a story called Superman and Me in 1997. But I really like this story. It sticks out to me a lot. So he uses life patterns of communitism, and there's a lot of ritual significance of objects like salmon and eagles, and that's really common within the Native American culture. So within his stories he also touches upon, like, the reconstruction of the Native American culture and how it's kind of misconstrued by Euro-American history. And it places Native Americans into a literary context, and it shows the cultural significance and social practices, which I think is really cool. So the summary of the story is there's two main characters, Victor and Thomas Builds a Fire. So Victor ends up losing his job at the same time that he finds out that his father has passed. And out of nowhere, he ends up meeting with his old friend, Thomas Builds a Fire. And they were friends in the past, but, like, a lot happened throughout their life that they separated. So both of them traveled to Phoenix, Arizona to retrieve Victor's father's ashes, and throughout the story there's a lot of flashbacks between Victor and Thomas Builds the Fire. So some literary elements. The themes within the story have a lot to do with family, friendship, and tribal identity. Family, because obviously this whole story is based around going to Phoenix, Arizona to grab Victor's father's ashes. Friendship, because the story is also based around the friendship that Victor and Thomas Builds the Fire had, and that they eventually continue to carry on. And tribal identity is one of the themes because Victor has a really tough time with whether he wants to be a part of the Native American culture or not anymore, and Thomas Builds the Fire helps him a lot with that. So the setting is on an Indian reservation in Washington, and most Indian reservations are generally poor. And obviously Phoenix, Arizona is one of the settings, and another setting is when they were on the plane to go to Phoenix, Arizona. Now, most of the setting has to do with the reservation in Phoenix, Arizona, but I added on the plane because I thought it was really cool. They met this one gymnast on the plane, and her name was Kathy. And it's kind of symbolic because it shows Victor's, like, inflexibility with his life, but, like, the gymnast is obviously flexible. But I also thought it was cool because Kathy was part of the 1980s Olympic Games, and the U.S. government actually boycotted the 1980 U.S. Olympic Games. And it's kind of significant because it shows, like, how the United States government is self-serving when it comes to athletes and also Native Americans, and we'll touch up on that. So the point of view is limited omniscient. It's told from Victor's perspective with insight into his thoughts and feelings. The characterization is really important because Victor and Thomas are completely two different people. So Victor's negative, he's really insecure, and he's kind of standoffish. But Thomas, he's really spiritual, he's outgoing, he's dependable, and he's easy to talk to. He's like the guy you want around you when you're having a really bad day. He will lift you right up. It's important because there's a lot of conflict when it comes between the two friends because they're so different. So, man versus self, Victor deals with the loss of losing his native tradition, yet despises them. So he's like, he has like this internal conflict, like, what do I do? I want this, I want to be a part of this, but I don't at the same time. Another man versus self is, Thomas says that Victor's father will rise, because once again, Thomas is obviously very spiritual and outgoing, and he's going to say like the positive sides of things, but at the same time, Victor believes it's just letting go. So that kind of shows you the conflict with himself. Another one is towards the end, Victor doesn't want Thomas in his life. Man versus man. Victor ended up beating up Thomas when they were younger, and it's important because after Victor let go of his native tradition, the only thing left in his life that was Thomas, and for him to beat Thomas up kind of shows like that he really doesn't want it, especially since it was the only thing left in his life that he had from it. So some literary techniques, there's a lot of imagery in this. For example, quote unquote, it will be beautiful, his teeth will shine like silver, like a rainbow, he will rise. Thomas said that about Victor's father when they were standing by the water and they saw a salmon jump out. Another quote that has a lot of imagery in it is, the stink rolled out and made them both gag. Victor's father had lain in that trailer for a week in 100-degree temperature. That's on page 588. So there's some foreshadowing in this. When they were younger, Victor and Thomas had like a fireworks show, but they didn't have a lot of fireworks. They only had a few bottle rockets, that was it. And the narrator of the story said years later they would need much more. Now that's foreshadowing because, like, obviously years later, like, they're going through this whole thing. Victor's trying to get rid of his native identity, but Thomas is trying to push him back towards it, or not even push him back towards it, just trying to like reason with him to be okay. And so that's what that means. Years later they would need much more, like, not just speaking about the rockets, but all the internal conflicts that Victor's dealing with and all that. So there's a lot of symbolism within this story as well, and this is one of my favorite parts, because Native Americans traditionally see a lot of things as symbols, like salmon, eagles, like I mentioned before. So one of the symbols is a jackrabbit, and when Victor and Thomas were driving, a jackrabbit came out in front of them and they accidentally hit it. Well, I don't know if it was an accident, but they hit it. And it kind of symbolizes their friendship, kind of how it just died out of nowhere. Because in the past they had a really good friendship until Victor started feeling all these emotions towards Thomas and his religion and everything like that. So yeah, it symbolizes their friendship. But at the same time, Victor and Thomas joked around as if like the jackrabbit committed suicide. Now I took that in another symbolic way, that like Victor and his father had the opportunity to escape their own life, but they refused to. So another symbol is fire, and Thomas builds the fire, that's his native name. The fire represents passion in the heart, and it's a transforming agent for Victor. Victor finds out Thomas has been a part of his story for a long time, because before they came back to be friends, when Victor saw Thomas in the store, Thomas had known that Victor's father passed, and that's kind of how Victor found out. Another symbol is salmon, and that's a big one in Native American culture. It's determination, renewal, and prosperity. And like I said earlier, when the salmon was jumping out of the water, Victor said it was just letting go, because he's just that negative person who takes everything in a different aspect than Thomas Builds the Fire does. Thomas Builds the Fire saw the salmon and said it was renewal, like this is a new start. And the last symbol is sunrise, and that's pretty straightforward. Sunrise, a new beginning. So, what does it mean to say Phoenix, Arizona? I took this as Victor and Thomas, they both have their own views on Phoenix, Arizona. You're going to talk to Victor and he's going to tell you, oh, what does it mean to say Phoenix, Arizona? Well, my dad died. I got stuck in a car with my old friend who I despise because whatever reason, because he still carries his Native American culture around with him, and Victor's trying to stray from that. But if you ask Thomas what it means to say Phoenix, Arizona, he'll tell you, like, I went on a journey with one of my closest friends. His father passed away. We went to go get his ashes. He'd be more outgoing and spiritual about it. And it wasn't necessarily about Victor's father. I feel like it was more about the connection and disconnection and renewal of the friendship between Victor and Thomas. So here's my works cited. I know you probably can't see it.